Well, after you've spent a lifetime more than you'd probably care to admit sifting through annual reports and scanning the front pages of the paper over breakfast, you can't help but see the patterns. Clear patterns. You watch how human sentiment, well, it just ebbs and flows like the ocean. And you learn that fear, it travels at the speed of light, while reason, well, reason takes the long way home. It's always been that way. The thing that truly gets me is this. Most people, for all their supposed knowledge and all those diplomas they've got framed, they seem condemned to repeat the same financial blunders, one generation after the next. The technology changes, the decade changes, but the human behavior? That stays exactly the same. I was born in 1930, right in the long shadow of the Great Depression. In those days, money was tight. I mean, really tight. Every single cent had to justify its existence. You didn't just spend a nickel. You had to have a good reason for it. Wasting anything was frowned upon. I made my first profit at 11, selling 6 bottles of Coca-Cola for a quarter. I'd keep the 5-cent profit. And let me tell you, I learned the lesson, then that stuck with me. Fortunes are not made in these big, exciting flashes of brilliance. Music, no, they are built in the long, quiet, unobserved stretches of what most people would call boring patience. The kind of patience that makes your neighbors think you're missing the party. See, everyone is hunting for a shortcut. They want the overnight success, the one weird trick, the hack. They want to talk about the stock that went vertical or the real estate deal that minted a millionaire before the weekend. But the real method, well, it's almost scarier to them because it demands a skill most people simply don't possess, the ability to wait. To just sit there while the rest of the world is frantically chasing the next big thing. There are principles, real principles, that wealthy people operate by. These aren't rules they broadcast on social media or brag about at dinners. And why not? I'll tell you why. Because if these rules were thrilling, they'd be common knowledge. And the minute a strategy becomes common knowledge, its advantage disappears. It's that simple. It's like having a great fishing hole. The moment you put a map to it in the local paper, it stops being a great fishing hole, doesn't it? So, what I'm sharing with you is not some mystical secret. It's not a get-rich-quick formula from a late-night TV ad. It is simple. It is practical. And it has been proven by the slow, steady march of time. These are the principles that have built fortunes while others were busy chasing shortcuts. You're probably asking, Warren, if it's this simple, why isn't everyone doing it? That's a perfectly logical question. The answer is that simple is not a synonym for easy. A simple concept, like eating healthier and exercising, is incredibly difficult to execute. Our brains, you see, are not optimized for the long term. We are wired for the immediate payoff. We want the satisfaction now, not the deferred reward later. And Wall Street, boy, they understand this better than anyone. They sell you excitement because excitement generates commissions. They sell you complexity because complexity makes you think you need them and justifies their fees. But the truth? The real truth is that building wealth is about as exciting as watching a coat of paint dry. It is about making a sound decision today and then having the discipline to make that same sound decision tomorrow and the next day and the next for years on end. I have observed thousands of people in my life. Smart people. People with high IQs and impressive credentials. And the thing that separates those who build sustainable wealth from those who don't. It isn't intellect. It's not who they know. It's not even luck, though a little luck never hurts. It is temperament. It is the emotional fortitude to do the boring thing while everyone else is at the casino. It's the ability to save when others spend, to buy when others panic, and to hold when others are trading got now. I'm not suggesting you live like a hermit. I've certainly enjoyed my share of hamburgers and cokes, but I am saying that if you want to build real, lasting wealth, the kind that brings you freedom, you must understand these rules. These 7 rules that the truly wealthy follow, but rarely, if ever, advertise. Why am I telling you? Well, I'm at an age where hoarding secrets seems a lot less valuable than passing on what I've learned. And maybe, just maybe, if you grasp these principles, you'll sidestep the major errors I've watched destroy so many fortunes. So, let's get to it. Let's talk about what actually works. Not what's exciting, not what gets clicks, but what truly builds wealth over a lifetime. Ready? Good, because this might just change how you see money. Asterisk. The first rule is straightforward. Only invest in what you understand. I call this your circle of competence. Back in the day, a master craftsman, say, a barrel maker in old Europe, he didn't wake up and decide to get into the silk weaving business. No, he stuck to his craft. He perfected it. He passed that deep knowledge to his apprentice. That is how skill compounds. It's the same way wealth compounds. When I look at any company, and I cannot explain, in 1 or 2 simple sentences, exactly how it makes money and why it has an advantage, I pass. It's that simple. It doesn't mean it's a bad company. It just means it's not in my circle. It's for someone else to figure out. You see, the most successful investors I've known are not the ones who brag about how much they know. They are the ones who are ruthlessly, painfully honest about what they don't know. That, right there, is the beginning of wisdom. When you operate inside your circle, your error rate plummets. You spot opportunities others miss because you're seeing the full picture. The second you step outside that circle, you are no longer investing. You are guessing. You are gambling. And hope, let me tell you, is not a viable financial strategy. Rule 2 is even shorter. Don't lose money. It sounds obvious, doesn't it? But it is, by far, the most difficult principle to adhere to. Most people are so focused on the upside, they forget that avoiding catastrophic mistakes is more important than chasing spectacular gains. Let me repeat that. Because it's the bedrock of everything. Avoiding the big loss matters more than hitting the big winner. The math is just brutal. If you lose 50% of your capital, you must then achieve a 100% return just to get back to where you started. Was born in the shadow of 1929. And I heard the stories from my father about what happens when a system breaks. I also had a front row seat in 2008 as the entire global financial system teetered on the brink. Different decades, same human failing, greed, leverage, and the belief that this time it's different. Losing money, especially when you're starting out, is like trying to cross a canyon on a thin, rickety rope. You might make it, but one misstep and the game is over. Why not just take the sturdy bridge? Why introduce risk you don't need to take? I never built my wealth by swinging for the fences. The real secret, the one that doesn't sell newsletters, is not in rapid multiplication. It's in studiously avoiding losses for a long enough period for time to work its magic. Time is the ally of the investor who is not losing capital, but it is the enemy of the person who is. Compound interest is a miracle, but every time you take a big loss, you reset that miracle. You have to start all over again. How do you follow this rule? It connects directly to Rule 1. You buy what you understand. You don't use leverage borrowed money because leverage turns a small error into a fatal one. And you insist on a margin of safety. You buy things for less than you think they're worth, so that even if your calculations are a bit off, you're still protected. Most people think this is a game of being right. It's not. It's a game of not being catastrophically wrong. If you can just avoid the big, stupid mistakes, the upside almost always takes care of itself. Rule 3 is the one that filters out almost everyone. It demands something our modern world has trained us to abandon. patience. I'm not talking about wait in line at the coffee shop patience. I'm talking about decades. Time is your greatest asset, but only if you let it work. Most people get antsy. Over the last century, the U.S. stock market has delivered an average annual return of around 10%. Not because every investor was a genius, but because the ones who won simply stayed put. They didn't sell in a panic. They didn't jump out when the headlines were terrifying. They just held on. I have owned stakes in businesses for 30, 40 years. Coca-Cola, American Express. I've held them for decades. The critical factor wasn't the precise day I bought them, though getting a fair price is important. The critical factor was all the years I did nothing. All those years when others were trading, chasing fads, paying commissions, and generating tax bills, I just held on. I let the businesses grow, adapt, and compound their value. Compounding is like planting a tree. You put an acorn in the ground, and for the first few years, it looks like nothing. It's just a sapling. You don't go out every morning with a ruler to measure its growth. That would be foolish. But you come back 20 years later, and it's a giant oak, providing shade for the whole yard. When did that happen? It happened every single day, just too slowly to notice. That's compounding. The waiting is what does the work. Most people can't stand it. They check their portfolios daily, treating it like a slot machine. Every dip causes anxiety. Every rise causes euphoria. All this activity, this doing, is just friction. It's value destroying. You pay taxes on your gains, you pay fees on your trades, and you interrupt the magic of compounding. You keep digging up the sapling to see if the roots are growing. Asterisk. Rule 4 flows directly from patience. Focus, in my opinion. Diversification is largely a protection against not knowing what you're doing. Let me be clear. If you don't have the time or the desire to really understand businesses, you should diversify. Buy a bit of everything. That way, when you are wrong, and you will be, it doesn't wipe you out. Diversification is a life raft for the person who doesn't know how to navigate. There is no shame in that. But if you do know what you're doing, if you have identified a handful of truly wonderful businesses inside your circle of competence, why would you deliberately dilute your best ideas with your 50th best idea? The super investors I wrote about years ago all had this in common. They made a few high-conviction bets. Not 50, not 100. They found a few things they understood deeply, and they let time magnify their results. Great performers don't try to play every sport. A world-class surgeon doesn't also try to be a world-class plumber. They master one thing. They go deep, not wide. The same is true in investing. I would rather own 3 businesses I understand intimately than 50 businesses I only vaguely know. When you truly understand an enterprise, you know when it's cheap, you know when it's expensive, and you can tell the difference between a temporary headwind and a permanent impairment of the business. So, what do? Most days, I sit in my office in Omaha, and I read. I think, and I do nothing. That nothing, that patience, that focus, that is where the real work of wealth building is done. Wall Street wants you to be active. They make money when you trade. But you make money when you don't. You make money by finding quality and holding it, by tuning out the noise. The stock market is, as I've said, a device for transferring money from the impatient to the patient. If you can be the patient one, you will do just fine. Asterisk Rule 5 is about friction. Keep your costs low. I have watched more fortunes bleed out from small, recurring fees than from single bad decisions. It's death by 1,000 cuts. Every fee you pay to a manager, that's a percentage of your return that you are giving away forever. Every commission you pay on a trade is a small tax on your activity. Every time you sell a winner too early, you incur a capital gains tax that you didn't need to. You are creating drag. The difference between a great result and a mediocre one often comes down to a single percentage point. 1% may not sound like much, but 1% skimmed off your returns every year for 30 or 40 years is the difference between a comfortable retirement and true wealth. In the old days, traders knew every transaction had a cost. Today, the apps make it look free, but it's not. Movement is expensive. Stillness is what compounds. Think of it as rowing a boat. Every time you frantically switch directions or splash around, you're creating drag. You're working hard, but you're slowing yourself down. The smart investor points the boat in the right direction at a good business and just rows steadily, letting the boat glide. All that other activity is just friction. Asterisk Rule 6 is the oldest in the book. Master your emotions. Fear and greed are the two most costly parasites in the financial world. I've always said that we simply try to be fearful when others are greedy, and greedy when others are fearful. Means you must keep your wits about you when the crowd is losing its mind. I saw it in the late 1990s. Profits don't matter. It's a new paradigm. People thought I was a dinosaur for sitting it out. Then it all evaporated. I saw it again in 2008. The world was gripped by a fear so profound that credit itself froze. People were dumping shares in wonderful companies as if they were toxic waste. It's the same story as the South Sea bubble 300 years ago. The human behavior is identical. When your taxi driver starts giving you stock tips, as they were in 1999, you should probably be a seller. When that same taxi driver says he'll never own a stock again, as they did in 2009, you should probably be a buyer. The problem is that your animal brain is screaming at you to the exact opposite. It feels safe to buy when everyone else is buying. Greed. It feels terrifying to buy when everyone else is selling. Fear. But fortunes are made by acting rationally when others are acting emotionally. Human nature hasn't been upgraded in 10,000 years. If you can simply recognize your emotions and prevent them from making the final decision, you have an edge that most people will never, ever have. Asterisk Rule 7 is the simplest and therefore the most difficult. Stick with it. Most people abandon the strategy just before the compounding really starts to accelerate. They get discouraged. They see their friend get rich on some hot new thing, and they think they're doing it wrong. So they dig up the sapling. I didn't become a billionaire until I was in my late 50s. Late 50s. Think about that. Every single year before, that was just laying the foundation, brick by brick. If I had quit at 40 or 50, none of it would have happened. The great fortunes of history were built over decades. There's a reason these rules aren't shouted from the rooftops. It's because they are boring. They are countercultural. And they demand a level of patience that most people don't have. Our culture screams, move fast, break things, get rich now. These rules say, move slow, build carefully, get rich slowly. That doesn't sell. So let's recap the philosophy. Understand what you own. Avoid big losses. Be incredibly patient. Focus your bets on what you know. Keep your costs to an absolute minimum. Master your emotions. And stick with it. It's not a list of 7 tricks. It is one single unified approach. It's the oak tree. For most people, the best way to do this is with a simple, low-cost S&P 500 index fund. It's the ultimate. Buy what you understand. You're buying America. It's low cost. It requires patience. And it automatically stops you from making emotional mistakes. Just buy it regularly. Don't look at it, and let time work its magic. You will do better than 90% of the professionals. If you do want to pick stocks, you must have the discipline to follow these rules when it's hard. Because it will be hard. There will be years when you feel like a fool. Those are the moments when these rules matter most. This time is never different. Human nature never changes. That is the only secret. It's not sexy, but it works. And it will work for you if you let it. And now, with this Supreme Court ruling, we have reached an inflection point. It's no longer just about stopping questionable ideas. It's about relitigating the very limits of executive momentum. This decision wasn't confined to a law journal. It was broadcast across the nation. It was a direct confrontation. Some may dismiss it as a technical fight over dismissal rights, but it reveals a much deeper conflict over who defines the rules of engagement. In the corporate world, if a CEO starts firing board-appointed officers without authorization, you don't call it bureaucracy. You ask if the institution's checks still function. Heading into an election year, risk always increases. But risk tied to the concentration of executive power is a different category entirely. We have now seen the highest court visibly position itself between the presidency and unchecked authority. That is not noise. That is a signal. This case may appear to be about one job, but underneath it lies the power of the purse. That is the mechanism Congress has to keep the executive branch honest. If that power is lost, the entire balance of government fails, and it fails quickly. In recent years, the executive has increasingly relied on emergency powers not for wars or natural disasters, but to re-engineer budgetary control, attempting to bypass Congress systematically. The real number to watch: over 50 national emergencies are still active. That is not a government in crisis. It is a government using crisis as a workaround. When emergency declarations become the standard operating procedure, it signals a quiet transition from constitutional process to executive improvisation. The danger isn't that people miss this. It's that they assume someone else is minding the store. But institutions, like investments, decay if they are not monitored. A president maneuvering around legislative oversight may sound like an internal dispute, but the long-term cost touches everyone. Rules designed to protect the public are being bypassed under legal cover. As that awareness grows, so does public anxiety about the precedent this sets for every administration that follows. The core of the matter is this: when a president can use emergencies to override Congress and even remove officials without the proper checks, the structural lines that define our government blur. Who intervenes if the courts waver? What happens when restraint is no longer a requirement but an option? Fortunately, in this specific instance, the Supreme Court provided clarity. Their answer, "Not here, not like this," was a reassertion of balance in a system that was tipping too far. What matters now is whether the system holds. Will executive power respect this limit, or are we about to witness a constitutional breakdown in real time, live on every screen in the country? This isn't just a dispute. It's about restraint. And like any leveraged position, once discipline is lost, recovery is incredibly difficult. We are watching a live test of how governance responds when one branch stretches beyond its design. For investors and voters, this is a reckoning with what happens when power is reshaped by conflict rather than by consensus. And where did it start? With something that seemed minor, the Library of Congress. That may sound bureaucratic, but I've seen this in business. A hostile takeover rarely begins with a frontal assault. It begins in overlooked corners with obscure bylaws and subtle restructurings. Then you look up, and the guardrails are gone. That is how precedent is set, not with a bang, but with quiet repetition. Once it's established, it becomes the new normal. The official in question wasn't just any employee. Their role is legally tied to a branch the president does not control. The lower courts were unanimous. This power belongs to Congress. The law draws a firm line for a reason. But the administration treated it like a simple staffing change. In finance, that's like a CEO attempting to fire the board's audit chair. You cannot override the process just because it's inconvenient. The legal strategy seemed to be that the president should have sweeping authority over anyone loosely tied to the executive, even if they report to Congress. That's not constitutional logic. It's opportunism. It's a dangerous mindset in business, and even more so in government. Despite the legal weakness, the administration pushed it, perhaps assuming ideological alignment from the very justices the president appointed. In investing, we call that believing your own hype. But the court didn't comply. Even the president's own appointees did not shield him. They issued what analysts have called a direct and public rebuke. That's institutional resistance. Sending a message: we are not for sale. One justice posed a sobering hypothetical regarding the other case. If a future president issued an unconstitutional order, say, to confiscate firearms, would that order stand until the Supreme Court finally struck it down? Her point was clear. If federal judges lack the power to issue immediate, broad injunctions, executive power runs unchecked. In any system, legal or financial, unchecked momentum causes the most damage before the correction can arrive. The president's reaction to the rebuke was broadcast live. His expression was unmistakable: anger and shock. That is the look of someone who expected compliance and received a firm boundary. His legal team appeared caught flat-footed. Within hours, allies were spinning narratives of judicial activism. But when a system enforces its own rules, that isn't activism. That is the structure doing its job. That the irony is glaring. The same voices who celebrated judicial power now attack it when it applies limits. But this is a trend. Institutional pushback is building, based not on politics, but on accumulated resistance to a pattern of overreach. When the pattern repeats, it triggers a correction. 66 blocked attempts out of 152, a 43% rejection rate. The courts are repeatedly saying the presidency has drifted too far. There is a pattern emerging that looks less like leadership and more like a constitutional stress test. The real fault line, however, is money. The power to spend is the power to govern, and our Constitution gives that power squarely to Congress. It is the financial firewall. One person making all the spending calls is not a government. It's a single point of failure. Yet that is the path being pursued, using emergency declarations as accounting tricks to freeze and redirect funds. That is financial engineering with no board oversight. If Congress loses its grip on federal spending, the laws they pass become symbolic. We are watching the erosion of the institutional safeguards that keep power distributed. When a single executive can allocate funds and bypass oversight, we are no longer debating policy. We are watching the mechanisms of democracy break down. The administration's objective is clear: limit the reach of lower courts. Judges who block policies are seen as obstacles, not checks. And this is all happening while over 50 national emergencies remain active. Emergency powers are supposed to be rare. When they become the permanent operating system, you are bypassing accountability. This isn't urgency. It's a strategy to replace deliberation with declaration. If one president consolidates power this way, the next president sees a precedent. Unchecked power accelerates. This all changed when the Supreme Court spoke in prime time. The court didn't just reject the attempt. They did it visibly. That public rejection creates reputational consequences. When a system applies its own laws to those who believed they were immune, it isn't political. It's structural. It's what long-term investors count on. The Supreme Court is designed to set boundaries. This isn't turbulence. It's a self-correction. But based on the president's response, framing the court's duty as betrayal, it's clear he expected loyalty, not limits. That reaction is a pattern. Deny, shift blame, attack the institution. When leadership cannot absorb resistance, it doesn't adapt. It escalates. We are now in a full-blown institutional scramble. This wasn't a procedural error. It was a public censure from a court partially built by Trump himself. Over 150 lawsuits challenging executive authority are still pending. This is growing tension. The Supreme Court has now signaled a willingness to impose limits openly. That changes the incentive landscape. If legal boundaries are treated as optional, we are debating the survival of constitutional order. The real risk is the erosion of institutional memory. Bad precedent, like bad debt, compounds. We may be watching the slow unraveling of the architecture that has defined American governance. As we approach the 2025 election, this matters. The average American may not read legal theory, but they understand the visual of power being checked. When that Supreme Court ruling happened live, credibility was what the president lost. This is about image and consequences. For years, Trump built a brand of invincibility. This ruling punctured that narrative on a national stage. When a president is publicly rebuked by the highest court, it's a reputational haircut. And in my world, perception compounds. Once the electorate questions whether a leader respects the guardrails, it's not just polls that move. It's market trust and institutional confidence. We are no longer operating in the realm of the hypothetical. This discussion is not an academic exercise about constitutional theory. It is about the tangible exercise of real operational power. In business, a company's health isn't just defined by its corporate charter, but by its day-to-day governance, how it actually spends capital, how it respects its internal controls, and how its leadership behaves under pressure. What we are witnessing now is the real-time stress testing of our nation's operational governance, and the consequences are no longer theoretical. We are seeing the machinery itself, not just the blueprint, being pushed to its limits. The most concerning aspect of this is the revelation that the system's health now depends far less on its written laws and almost entirely on its unwritten norms. A legal framework provides the skeleton, but the norms of self-restraint, mutual institutional respect, and good faith operation are the load-bearing walls. We are now asking the skeleton to hold the entire weight because that foundational trust has eroded. In my world, a contract is only as strong as the integrity of the parties who sign it. Once you lose that unwritten norm of good faith, the contract is just a piece of paper, and the partnership has already failed. Even if the lawyers haven't realized it yet, this shift is so profound that we are seeing evidence that, even among the president's most ardent base, there is a growing, quiet awareness that this situation transcends simple partisan loyalty. People will support a leader through policy disagreements and even through personal controversies. But they become fundamentally uneasy when the integrity of the system itself comes into question. It's the difference between backing a CEO who launched a failed product and backing one who is actively dismantling the audit committee. When the stability of the entire enterprise feels at risk, allegiance to one individual becomes a secondary concern to the preservation of the institution. This reveals the true long-term danger. The risk is not that one man overreaches. The risk is that we normalize it. A single breach of protocol can be corrected and isolated, but a breach that is normalized, accepted, or successfully defended sets a new, lower precedent for all future behavior. The next leader will inevitably take that new boundary and stretch it even further. In corporate governance, the first time a CEO bypasses internal controls without consequence is the most expensive breach of all. It doesn't just cost what was lost on that one action. It signals to the entire organization that the controls are now optional. It provides a blueprint for future systemic erosion. This is why, in governance, just as in investing, when short-term gains are prized over long-term integrity, the collapse always comes quietly, and then all at once. I have seen this pattern my entire career. A company can boost its quarterly earnings, a short-term gain, by cutting research and development or taking on ruinous debt destroying long-term integrity. For a long time, the stock price might even look good. The erosion is invisible to the untrained eye, but the foundation is rotting. Then, one day, a single bad event or a missed payment arrives, and the entire structure fails. The collapse seems sudden, but it was guaranteed by the decisions made years earlier. We are watching our institutional integrity being traded for immediate political wins, and that is a debt that will, eventually, come due.